Welcome to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk.
Hey everyone, it's Jenny Lisk, and this is episode 102 of the Widowed Parent Podcast. So I had such a great discussion with Bryan Jung for this episode. And Bryan is actually here in Seattle, just like I am. And Bryan's dad died when he was almost 11 years old. And Bryan was so kind to come on the show and talk to us about his experience and his reflections. He's now in his 20s, and he has started a creative platform called This Is Why, which offers people who lost a parent at a young age a place to tell their stories. So listen in for Bryan talking about why he started that, why he decided to get involved with Camp Aaron as a volunteer as a young adult, and his reflections on his experience and his family's experience after his dad was murdered and growing up from that point on. I always do think it's such a privilege to hear from people who lost a parent when they were young, who are willing to share with us so we can better understand a little bit about our kids' perspective. So listen for me talking about that when I introduce Bryan in the beginning. And I hope you enjoy my discussion with Bryan Jung. I wish I could sit down with each and every one of my listeners and have a cup of coffee and chat and hear about your life and just support each other in any way that we can. Unfortunately, with most of my listeners not being near me in Seattle, that's not really feasible. But now there's a way that you can actually buy me a cup of coffee if you'd like, a virtual cup that is. If you appreciate the show, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/widowedparent and chip in any amount you like. I love coffee, and I will think of you and go and get a cup to enjoy. I'm grateful for every bit of your support, and I'm honored to be doing this work. And if you've appreciated the show, if you've learned something or found the guests interesting or felt a little less alone from listening to these guests, I hope you'll consider buymeacoffee.com/widowedparent. Thank you so much. Now on to the show. My guest today is Bryan Jung. Bryan lost his dad just before his 11th birthday. He's the founder of This Is Why, which is a creative platform and community for individuals who have lost a parent as a child or as a teenager. Bryan is joining us today from Bellevue, Washington. Bryan, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jenny. How's it going?
Good, good. Hey, it's really funny to be talking to you in Bellevue. I'm in Redmond. And I actually, they're both suburbs of Seattle.
Yes.
But the funny thing is they kind of blend together. And my house is actually 2 houses away from the Bellevue line. So we are like practically in each other's backyards here.
We're pretty much there. I'll wave to you through the window over here.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. And well, I was reading your website and saw that you went to the business school at the UW, which I also went to.
Yes.
Quite a few years before you, but that's all right. But it's a small world, so that's terrific.
It is. Yes. Yeah. UW is such a great school. And, I think both of us having the local ties, it's pretty cool to meet someone like you.
Yeah. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs. I wasn't going to say it, but I'm glad you did.
Yeah. Oh, of course. Of course. Well, hey, so thank you for joining us today. And, I always find it such a privilege to talk to people like yourself, who are now adults, who lost a parent when they were young. And, some of the people that I've interviewed, their dad or their mom was, they were 3 or they were 12 or they were 19 when their mom died or their dad died. And now, gosh, I think the people I've interviewed have been from their mid-20s up through their 60-something maybe. And people, adults of different age groups reflecting on those experiences. And I think as a widowed parent, one of the things I try to do is everything I can to understand my kids' experience better, right? And it's not like talking to other people about their journeys will tell me exactly what my own kids' experience will be, but it gives me things to think about, things I might not have thought of. Because even though the 3 of us all lost the same person, I lost a spouse and they lost a dad. And it's a different relationship. And so, what's going to be hard or what's going to be challenging, or it's different experiences. So That's a very long way of saying thank you for talking with us today. and being willing to come on and share your story. And also, of course, about the work you're doing with This Is Why, because I want to share that with people as well. I think it's a really cool platform you've got going. But let's just jump right in. Let's just back way up before everything changed. Can you tell us a little bit about your family? What was normal life like?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me and, having me on this podcast and being able to chat with you and kind of get your perspectives as well as exactly kind of what you mentioned in terms of kind of hearing from my side, but also your side, which is kind of how my mother was dealing with that aspect of it. So thank you so much. But I have one older brother who's 3 years older, and it's just us two and, mom and dad. So we were a pretty cohesive unit. We were all pretty close. My brother and I were very big into sports. So, a lot of our weekends and, practices midweek were all related to sports and tournaments and games and that sort of thing. So
what'd you play?
I was a big baseball player, but also played some basketball and some soccer, got into golf a little bit later in the career. But being able to kind of play different sports and kind of having different teams and, being able to kind of bring out the competitive side in different ways was a lot of fun. My brother was pretty similar in the same way, playing a lot of different sports as well. So that was a really nice outlet just to kind of do something outside of school, especially.
And this was here in Bellevue?
That's correct. Yeah. I went to went through the Issaquah School District. So I went to Issaquah Middle School, and then Issaquah High School. But before then, I went to Apollo Elementary in Renton in this program called the Merlin program. And so I was there from 3rd through 5th grade and then switched over to Issaquah. So I've been local, from then on. Things were pretty normal, I guess you could say, as nothing, popping out significantly in terms of kind of if there were any, stoppages or anything in terms of just going through every single year. I think, we just played sports, went to school and just kind of did, normal kid stuff. And so, things were pretty great. I was very close to my father. So that was pretty special to just kind of have us, spend that time together while we could. Yeah,
that's terrific. Okay. And was your mom a piano teacher at that time and your dad was a lawyer?
She was, yeah, she still is, which is pretty fantastic. So, she's been doing it even before I was born. So this has been kind of her lifelong passion, and kind of being able to see her continue that is pretty special. She was a piano teacher and always had her studio kind of in her house. So I was pretty lucky to, have her, and she could raise, my brother and I while my dad was out to his office and kind of doing his work there. So, that was pretty much the family dynamic back then.
Yeah, cool. Okay. And so your dad was a lawyer, so that gets us into then what happened. Can you tell us about that? And
Absolutely.
You were 9, I think?
Yes. Yeah. So that was kind of around the end of 2004. My dad was a lawyer around the area in the Korean American community, especially. So he was able to kind of bridge that gap between, the Korean community and the American community pretty well. And so I think being able to be bilingual really helped him to just kind of be able to help a lot of different people in those specific communities. So that's what he has been kind of doing all his life. November 3rd, 2004 is a day, I'll never, ever forget. That was pretty shocking, on all aspects, but essentially, my dad was working on a court case, and he was going to show up to court against an opposing lawyer. I think the opposing lawyer believed that my dad was a little bit ahead in the court case in terms of, winning. Apparently from, all the court case, the court dealings and all of that, apparently the opposing lawyer just wanted a bit of extra time to prepare and maybe get ahead of my father. So he wanted to essentially slow my father down in terms of prep work and that sort of thing. So he wanted to, somehow harm my father to kind of keep him in the hospital for a little bit just to get that time back. But unfortunately, it was a little
terrible.
More than that.
Wait a minute. That's terrible. Like, I'm losing my court case, so maybe I'll just mess with this guy somehow to slow him down.
Yeah, it's it's pretty significant in terms of kind of what all happened, but to have someone think that is something it's pretty bizarre. But it's just trying to deal with it, and just think about there might be people like that out there in this world, but there's so much good in this world as well. So it's finding that balance. But it was very shocking, especially kind of rereading everything that happened in terms of the court filings and the reports.
So tell us then, what did this lawyer do?
Yeah, so the opposing lawyer came to my dad's office the day that they were both supposed to show up in court, and came with a silenced pistol. And once, I'm not sure if he kind of waited around the parking lot of my dad's law firm, but when my dad was getting into his car, he fired his silenced pistol a few times and did shoot my dad in the head. And my dad was in a bedridden coma for quite some time then. But the opposing lawyer did kind of try to drive off, but luckily and thankfully there were witnesses who were able to kind of track down the car, color of the car, possibly the license plate, and I believe Bellevue PD was able to kind of come up on the scene and capture the opposing lawyer pretty quickly, and just kind of handled things from there. But that was a pretty profound day for sure.
Wow. That's terrible. Okay. And so you're 9 years old. So
Yes.
This guy shoots your dad and he's in a coma, and did that last for a while then?
Yeah. So my dad was in a coma, pretty much until his passing on February 11th, 2006, which was, a few days before my 11th birthday. So it was, maybe.
And that was over a year, if I'm doing the math right?
Correct. I believe a year and about 3 months.
Wow.
And, I think the toughest thing was just the visits, just seeing him being unable to talk, unable to move, unable to communicate, especially when on, November 2nd, 2004, we were hanging out like normal.
Yeah.
And, the first visit for sure was very, very, a lot of different emotions. I don't know if I necessarily cried because I think, I was just so much in shock.
Yeah.
But I remember going to the ICU and, seeing my dad in that state was, it was just so shocking. And, it was so special that, after a few days after everything happened, I think my mom did want my brother and I just to kind of wait a few days after November 3rd, just so we can kind of figure things out from a family perspective. Because there was, if I remember correctly, a lot of media kind of dealing with the reportings. And so we wanted to get away from that and kind of have our privacy there.
Yeah.
So I think my mom and some other, members of the family who live around kind of helped with dealing with all of that. But I think a few days after everything that happened, we went to the ICU as a family. And I think that's the first time that my dad opened his eyes, when he kind of heard my brother and I were there. So that was very special, and something I'll never forget. But just seeing him in that state for so long, especially was pretty tough.
Yeah. Okay. And again, you were 9 years old, and this lasted until just before your 11th birthday. So that is a long time in the life of a 9-10-year-old kid.
It is. And I think, because it was such a shock and so much trauma and just something that happened so quickly, it is kind of tough to really recollect a lot of things clearly from that time, because I think, I was processing as someone so young, but, I had my memories then, my experiences, but as I'm looking back now, it's almost like it was almost a blur for some time, just because things changed so rapidly. But then we got into a kind of a routine where my mom would go visit the hospital really frequently. I would maybe have a relative pick me up from, from school or different sporting events. So it kind of got into a different routine then. But about a little over a year. And, after my father moved out of the hospital, we moved him to kind of a different kind of care. And so, he was the same way, same state. But I tried to visit him as much as I could, just because, even though he was in that state, he was still my father. That wasn't going to change. And, just being able to spend that time with him as much as I could was pretty important to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for telling us about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that sounds really hard.
Yeah. Looking back, it definitely kind of, changed so many different dynamics within the family. But I think that's what made our family so close. And we're still so close today. And I think it's because we all went through that together. And I think just having that kind of bond, through all of that, through such a difficult, dark time, really got all of us, moving forward and continuing to push every step of the way. And so, I definitely relied on my mom for that. I know, my brother did as well, but also she might have relied on us, just to be able to know that, she is still going to take care of us. And she always wanted to make sure that she was going to put, our best foot forward. And, I always give so much credit to, my mother, just because she was the one that got my brother and I to where we are today. And, was able to kind of balance, taking care of us, but also visit my father while he was in the hospital and deal with the court, kind of decision making. And, that must have been, so difficult with so much on her plate, but what she was able to do, that's why I always say she's, the strongest person I know.
Mm. I imagine that, the extra elements of the media and the legal system being involved, right, in this, not everybody who has a death ends up having the media and the legal system as part of the situation. That's, extra stuff to deal with, and
right,
re-dragging, I imagine at some point there was a trial, and I don't know if that might, re-drag you back through everything. Were you old enough to, did you attend the trial, or did somebody tell you about it?
Yeah, I think, so I actually did not attend the trial. I think, my mom and other family members really wanted to protect my brother and I, and maybe just not, put us in that situation, so soon.
Yeah.
And I just remember, a few days, after November 3rd, 2004, we did stay at a relative's house just because we knew reporters were coming to our house, and we're going to try to get a story. So we were trying to stay away from all that, and we would go back to the house as we needed, get some things, and then, hop back over to our relatives. But I think, my mother and extended family just did a really good job just trying to keep my brother and I protected, just keep us away from all the negativity and, all the extra stuff going on.
Yeah.
And you're exactly right. I think just having those extra dynamics and factors and elements come into play, definitely was something probably way more, profound for my mother and extended family. But, being able to kind of stay away from that, I think was the best for my brother and I, just because of how young we were.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and speaking of being young, one of the things that that comes up a lot is that kids, they can only grieve initially at the kind of the level of understanding, cognitively based on their age. A kid who's 3 can only grieve at a 3-year-old level of understanding, and a kid who's 9 or 10, in your case, can grieve at that level of understanding. And I wonder, so as you got older then, into your teenage years and now into your 20s, have you found that you've kind of re-grieved as you have more, cognitive development as you've gotten older here and become, fully, you could do it adult level grieving now?
Yeah. What was interesting was, kind of looking back and just, you're exactly right. Just seeing how I was able to process everything, as I grew older and older. I think between 9 and 11, when that was kind of the bulk of when everything happened, I think that was just such a traumatic, confusing experience. So I think my grieving was really, just trying to get through day by day. There wasn't a lot of kind of reflecting on, how could I make myself happier, better, and that sort of thing. Just being so young, I think it was just more about processing from that point. I think as I got older, into my, early mid-teen years, and even late teen years, I did have a pretty significant anxiety disorder stemming from everything that happened. So that was a pretty significant thing for me in my life. Just having the support of different counselors and that sort of thing. My mother really wanted me to just try to find a good counselor for me, just to be able to kind of share things that maybe I wasn't comfortable sharing with my mom at the time. And, just kind of going through each phase of my life, I guess you could say, definitely had, its own kind of world of grief. I think as I got into my teen years, that was kind of a confusing time as well, just because I was kind of dealing with this pretty heavy anxiety disorder and just trying to, work my way through that. But in a way, as I got older, I definitely did get more and more mature, because I knew that, my mother was by herself. She was on her own taking care of my brother and I. And I think that was one of the biggest things that I take out of my whole experience, was I was very fortunate to be able to kind of learn empathy and sympathy very, very early. Just, being able to put myself in my mom's shoes, saying, I would probably be very, worked up about this or stressed about this. Like, how can I help her? So I think being able to kind of put myself on her side, and almost kind of feel like the man of the house, even though I was so young, I think that's where I kind of put my mindset at. So especially as I got older, I knew that my brother was going to go into high school, into college. And so he would be out of the house a little more, especially during college and then afterwards. So I would try to fill, the void of, doing some housework, doing the yard work, and kind of do that stuff to just kind of lighten the plate off my mother. I think that was very important to me. So I think, the grief experience in that way was, as I got older, it was more for me just trying to help out my mother more and more, as much as possible. And that's kind of how I helped kind of fill the void of our loss. And then, looking back to when I was a lot younger, was really just kind of working my way through it and working everything out together as a family.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned anxiety. I wonder if you're familiar with the book by Claire Bidwell Smith. It's called Anxiety, the Missing Stage of Grief.
I'm not, unfortunately.
Oh, you might be interested in that book. It's fascinating. And I interviewed Claire. I'll put the link in the show notes. I'm not sure off the top of my head what episode number it is. But I interviewed her when that book came out. It's fascinating, the links between anxiety and grief, and that people very often don't realize how, those really can go hand in hand. Not for everybody, obviously, but it's a very common thing. And her book was really interesting in kind of unpacking that.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I'd encourage anybody who's listening who's interested in that topic to have a listen to our discussion and then pick up her book, because it's important. It's an important topic, I think.
I would love to read that.
Yeah. You mentioned that you found a therapist. Was that hard? I mean, sometimes it's hard. It can be hard for anybody to find a therapist who's a good fit, but I imagine for a teenage boy, it might really be hard to find someone that you click with.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I did see a lot of different people, because I think it was, I knew that, looking back, they were doing what they could, to help me. But I think just as a young teenager, I didn't want to be there. It wasn't the easiest, kind of set of topics to talk about. And I didn't really have a personal connection with the therapist. So it really, there wasn't really a want of kind of sharing, everything that was going on. But I think two therapists were a little more profound in terms of impact. I do kind of forget their names at the moment, but I know that there were two. One was the one that inspired our family to get a little puppy, just because, the therapist, I think, saw that I really needed something or someone to fill that void, and mentioned, being so young, everyone loves a puppy. So she definitely recommended, maybe getting ready to possibly taking one in.
Did you get one?
We exactly did that. We had a little Maltese named Haley. She's still with us. Surprisingly, has the exact same birthday as me. So I think I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it was so special to find her. She's still with us. She's 15 years old now, so she's hanging in. But yeah, that was pretty profound because that really brought the joy of everyday life kind of back slowly in our family life, just having our little puppy running around and kind of having that distraction, as you could say, just taking care of her and kind of figuring out how to allow her to grow within the family. So that was pretty special.
Right.
And then there was another therapist who was kind of helping me through some of the tougher parts. I think he was asking me some of the better questions, if I remember right. He was asking me a lot of questions that I wasn't really getting asked before by other therapists. And so, one of the major kind of symptoms of my anxiety was, if I was in a new situation, it was almost like a panic. So my heart would just be racing. And I would just feel so uncomfortable, like I didn't want to be there. And so it would kind of shy me away from trying new things at the time. But, I can't really remember the exact specific questions he did ask, but I remember he was asking questions that allowed me to kind of open up my mind to say, this isn't all that bad. This new experience isn't, the worst thing. And so those kind of two therapists are the ones that I can remember that really kind of made that breakthrough impact, I guess you could say, in my life.
Yeah, that's terrific. Okay. Yeah, puppies are awesome. Puppies are a lot of work, but puppies are awesome.
Exactly. Can't go wrong.
I know, right? That's my dog's birthday is today, actually. So it's funny that you mentioned that.
Oh, that's
she
so great.
still feels like a puppy, but she's 5. So, Okay. Well, so speaking of therapy, switching gears slightly, did you ever have a chance to go to a kids or family grief center, like a grief program or a grief camp, like some kind of a activity or organization with a group of peers your own age who were grieving?
Yeah, I didn't, and I think kind of reflecting, that might have been a lot of me just being adamant about not being in an uncomfortable situation like that, because I know that sort of kind of environment can be tough for young children or teens who maybe lost a parent or are going through grief, to kind of put themselves out there and be as social as maybe they were before they were impacted by their loss. So I think that was also kind of part of why I didn't go, but also I think my mother didn't really want to push me too hard to kind of do something I didn't want to do. But I think she wanted me to at least, see a therapist just to kind of talk my way through it and get that sort of kind of help through what I was going through. So I think that was kind of the happy medium in terms of how she wanted me to get help, but also allow me to feel, as comfortable as I could in that sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So now I think though you did at some point then get involved with Camp Aaron. Can you tell us, well, first of all, what is Camp Aaron? And then tell us about your involvement there.
Yeah, Camp Aaron is a camp for children and teenagers who are kind of going through grief related to, a close family member or relative who has been affected by addiction or death or loss. So it really kind of is a great amalgam of, kids and teens who are kind of going through some sort of grief, some sort of bereavement and loss. And it's a great way for them to kind of all be connected, make different friends, make new friends, see old friends. And it's an annual camp that really kind of brings everyone together, but also kind of on the other side of it, there are a lot of great volunteers kind of organizing the specific events and kind of outlining everything to really try to help the campers get the most out of it. It's really a camp that does have a lot of fun aspects to it, a lot of activities, but also does kind of allow for some special, ritual tribute type of events. So I think kind of having that hybrid of kind of activities and events is really something that makes campers, especially first-time campers, want to revisit the camp the next year and really reconnect with their fellow campers that they maybe became friends with who they weren't before.
And so you did not go to that as a teenager yourself, but you went back then as a volunteer later, right?
Yeah, in the past years, I started to learn about Camp Aaron and knew that it was kind of local in the area, and I was in a kind of good position, in my life to kind of give more time to volunteer and kind of put in work that way. So 2019 was the first year that I volunteered for Camp Aaron. It was super special, just being on that side, the preparation going into it and seeing, all the hard work that goes into organizing an event like that every year, but also just seeing the community that's built, between the children and the teens, but also the volunteers, and just seeing that cohesiveness between how close everyone is. And so I volunteered for the first time then, and just being an observer essentially was so special. Especially, those kids who maybe weren't as comfortable showing up on the first day, but on the last day leaving, like they know that they're coming back the next year. I think that's kind of that mindset that makes Camp Aaron so special. I was able to play some piano during some ritual events that was something I'll never forget. Just kind of having that memory and being able to do what I could and contribute to the special experiences that those kids had was so special just to see from my side. So, 2019 camp was such a success, and last year obviously had to take a little bit of a break, but we're going virtual this year for 2021, and hopefully in 2022 things will be back to kind of in-person camps and events. So
are you going to help out this year with the virtual camp?
I am. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
I'm doing some work with kind of helping with some tangible resources that we're going to give out to the campers just to have, because yes, we are going to kind of do a lot of the virtual curriculum, but also they're going to be able to kind of get some gifts that the volunteers are preparing to kind of help them remember that this camp is special, even though it is virtual. So I'm very glad that, volunteers were able to kind of get together virtually and kind of make everything happen. Cause I know logistically it can be tough, especially when everything is kind of done over kind of virtual communication.
Yeah, that's awesome. Good. Well, and so I'm wondering if this experience, working with kids, grieving kids at Camp Aaron, is this part of what inspired you to start your new platform? This is why?
Yeah, it was all kind of around the same time. Back in 2019, I've already kind of had an idea of how can I help kids and teens who have been through what I've been through. That was essentially kind of the impetus of why I started This Is Why. And, that's really kind of where I wanted to keep things rolling, keep momentum going in terms of I really want to give back more of my time to help out, these young kids and teens, because I know that there are resources out there, but, if I can just contribute as much as I can, add another helper to that cause, I guess you could say, and, even just impact one child, that's all that matters to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's terrific. So tell us about the platform. Tell us, and other ways people can get involved in it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So This Is Why is a creative platform for children and teens, for individuals essentially who have lost a parent as a child or teenager. And so it's really a creative platform for, anyone who may be, in the middle of their grieving journey right now, and maybe their loss was a little more recent, or it could be, someone a little bit older who may have lost a parent, 30, 40 years ago. So, it's a nice way for a community to kind of be built with different perspectives and different stories being shared, but also all kind of hovering around the same, idea that, we did lose, a parent at such a young age, but together we can kind of get through it and share each other's learnings through life, and kind of have that support being built in that way. So, that was recently launched this Father's Day, June 20th. I thought it just made sense.
Yeah, for sure.
And, just the support I'm so grateful and thankful for, and just, want to continue just helping out as much as I can, in that sense. So we are, a website, but also, there are social media links out there. And so, we're trying to just outreach to as many individuals as possible to just let them know that if they are kind of one of these people who have a similar story. They can share their story if they're willing, and we can kind of collectively build, as a community, little by little.
Yeah, terrific. Okay, well, good. I encourage people to check that out, and I'll put a link in the show notes so that people can easily find that and reach out to you and read the stories that you've collected there and submit their story if it's of interest, or pass it along to somebody that they might know who might be interested in submitting a story there.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Gosh, I think we could keep talking about this all day. It's so great to talk with you, and including the fact that we're practically neighbors. So, but I do think we need to wrap this up here. So I'll ask you just one last question, if you don't mind. If you could say one thing to adults who have a grieving child in their life, what would you say to them?
I would say, family is so important, and just try to stay together as close as possible. I think there's so much that parents who maybe lost their spouse can get out of their kids who are going through their own experiences with grief and bereavement. But also, I think that together, that's what makes it so special, is that, yes, it is a very dark and tough time, but I think, as long as that sense of family is so strong, that's where the true support comes from. That's how, there can be that positive kind of vibe each and every day in terms of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And, like I said, there's never really a flip of the switch. Okay, we're done grieving, this is over with. It's going to be lifelong. And every individual has their own journey through it and their own kind of sentiment towards that. But I think with parents who have lost a spouse, I think it's so important just to find the joy in just having that close bond within the family. I think that's what makes the journey so special, looking back.
Yeah, terrific. Okay, well, I think that's a great place to end. So my guest today is Bryan Jung, founder of This Is Why. So Bryan, where can listeners find This Is Why online and on social media if they're interested in connecting with you?
Yeah, the website is thisiswhy.life, and on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, the handle is This Is Why Life. I do have a link tree that has links to all the platforms. So Jenny, I could provide that to you towards the end here. But thank you so much for having me. It was so great talking to you, and just sharing kind of my story with you. And already the impact that you're making and will continue to make is so special. So thank you for everything you're doing. And I look forward to reconnecting down the road.
Terrific. Well, Bryan, thank you so much for speaking with me today, and good luck with everything you're doing.
Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Bryan Jung as much as I did. You can find show notes and all the links at widowedparentpodcast.com. Look for episode 102. So from time to time, I do live interviews in addition to these weekly recorded shows, live interviews that are broadcast simultaneously on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And this week, I spoke with Joyal Mulheron of Evermore. And Evermore is a nonprofit working to advocate for changes and better policies specifically in the area of bereavement care. So Joyal explained that bereavement leave is actually not protected by U.S. law. Some companies offer it, but it is not guaranteed in any way. So it means that a person actually could be fired, even if they take one day of leave when someone close to them dies. So Evermore has been working to introduce some legislation, or to work with Congress to get some legislation written that would protect a few days of bereavement leave. They're asking for 5 days, which would give many workers about a week in effect off. And I spoke with her this week because this next 10 days, so really the next week from the time you're hearing this, is a critical opportunity to get new legislation written to address this. And she says that all of us can help. And specifically, she's asking us to call. There are 16 senators who are critical to getting this done. The specific senators are listed on their website. Their website is live-evermore.org. And I'll put the direct link to the page on their site with the information in the email for this week. and in this week's blog post. But you can find it if you go to their website, live-evermore.org. This is an issue that has had bipartisan support. Has been work done on this in the current administration and the past during the previous administration as well. So I'd encourage you, if this is an area that you think is important, to call these senators. Doral said actually, if somehow there's a window right now to get this introduced, and if it doesn't get introduced now, it's for some reason it's going to be like another decade before there's another chance to get this in. So I'd encourage you to check that out. A few resources for you this week. First of all, there will be an event on September 9th, a virtual event hosted by the New York Times. And it's called Kids and COVID, What to Know. And I think it's specifically oriented around back to school. Here we are with the Delta variant, with kids starting back to school. Lots and lots of questions people have. Dr. Anthony Fauci will be one of the panelists, and Dr. Lisa Damore, who's been a guest on this show, speaking from the perspective as a child psychologist and her expertise on this topic of going back to school in these days. There's several other panelists as well. I'll put a link directly to the event, again, in the email that's going out with this and the blog post on my website, jennylisk.com. Make sure you're on my list so you're getting the emails and get the links to these things. And you can always also find it on the blog post on my website as well. Another resource. So another previous guest on this show, Claire Bidwell Smith, who has written a fascinating book called Anxiety, the Missing Stage of Grief, and I interviewed her last year on the show. I'd encourage you to take a listen to that and check out her book. She has a brand new podcast. It's called New Day, and it premieres on September 15th. So I have not listened to it yet. It is coming out in about 2 weeks here. She says, we jump right into discussing the big question we're all asking. How can I lead a more fulfilling life? New Day has one simple goal: to help you get through today and look forward to tomorrow. So it sounds very interesting. She's got some terrific guests lined up. I know one of her first guests is Cheryl Strayed, who you may know from the book Wild, and some other pretty big name guests as well. So do look out for that dropping on September 15th. It's called New Day, and it's a new podcast from Claire Bidwell Smith. And finally, another previous guest on the show, Dr. B.J. Miller, has an organization called Mental Health, and he's doing a lot in the end-of-life space. And one of the things he's doing, so this is for anybody listening who is a caregiver or who knows a caregiver, family caregiver caring for a loved one, whether it's your spouse, maybe it's your parents, or somebody caring for their parents or their other loved ones. He runs a monthly webinar series. It's free. It's open to all caregivers. The next one is on September 17th, and you can sign up on their website, Mental Health, METTLEHEALTH, mentalhealth.com. And again, I'll put the link to that in the email and today's blog post as well. So make sure you sign up for the email so that you can get all these links directly. And I hope some of those resources are helpful for you this week. Okay, I want to finish out today by thanking someone who recently wrote a review on Apple Podcasts of the podcast. Someone named Kelly Cha Cha. The subject is helpful resource for grieving. And this person says, I cannot say enough about how much I love this podcast. As a recent widow, every episode is full of helpful resources for grieving, parenting, and more. So thank you so much, Kelly Cha-Cha. I love to hear your feedback, your comments. Mostly, it's important to me that the topics and the content are resonating and are helpful, and that you guys want to keep listening because you think of this as a helpful resource and something that you want to keep coming back to and referring other people to who may need it as well. So thank you, Kelly Cha-Cha, so much for leaving that wonderful review. And if you're listening and you haven't had a chance to leave a review yet, please take just a moment and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. The most important thing about that in terms of helping other people find the show is that the reviews and stuff kind of kick the algorithm into gear. And so it's on the one hand, it's terrific for me to hear what you guys are thinking. And on the other hand, it helps people to find the show who may need it. So I really appreciate it if you take just a moment and leave a quick review. And remember, if you haven't yet had a chance to pick up Future Widow, my memoir, listeners get a special 15% discount on the ebook if you buy directly from me. So just go to jennylisk.com/ebook and use the code listener15 when you check out, listener15, at checkout to save 15% on the Future Widow ebook. As always, thank you for listening, and until next week, keep smiling.
Thank you for listening to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk. Connect with us on social media and at widowedparentpodcast.com.